Welcome to this episode of Japan's Top Business Interviews. I'm your host, Dr. Greg Story, the president of Dale Carnegie Training Japan, and my special guest today is an old friend of mine, Stefan Sacre, who is the president, CEO of Carl Zeiss Group in Japan. Welcome.
Hello, Greg. A pleasure to be on your show.
Yeah, thank you very much. For our audience, tell us, how did you get to Japan? What have you been doing here? And tell us about when you got to Zeiss and what's happening with the group. So can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, I hope that you are on for a long story. So it starts actually when I was in university. I studied physics. So I've got a pretty firm background in science and technology. I studied physics and had a PhD in engineering. So that was towards the end of the 80s. And perhaps some of you do not remember, that was the time when Japan was in the press as the giant that came out of nothing. So in particular, the areas where Japan exceeded were semiconductor industry, and there was Toyota, unknown company coming out of nothing with Toyota production system. And me as a person who worked in that area, this was very fascinating.
So you went to university where?
In Bonn and to Berlin.
In Berlin, right? So you're in Germany and you're observing this juggernaut Japan growing, and then you started working in Germany?
No, I did not. Perhaps one additional input came from my professor. He was a kind of paranoid. He saw the end of civilization as we know it, because he had the idea that the Western world would be rolled over by Japan. Mm-hmm. And he advised his students, better watch out. And wow. That sounded at that time pretty frightening, but at the same time also interesting.
So after graduation in Germany, do you join a German company at that time?
No. On that time, actually, there was a kind of recession, as I remember, and I was still considering to start a research career. So therefore, after the PhD, I was considering a postdoc. And since this usually brings you to a foreign country, then I choose Japan as my next step to do a postdoc. So, and exactly, so you can say by coincidence, I got a postdoc position in Japan. So, and people then ask me quickly, where, what university? And I always said, it is a university in Tokyo. But then people said, but there are dozens of universities. And I said, okay, I must figure out. And then I figured out, the University of Tokyo. And I said, perhaps also the university. At that time, that was all the same to me.
But Todai is a monster.
It's a monster.
Brand for a university in Japan.
Once I mentioned it, while being in Japan, the reaction was quite different. Yeah.
So how long did you do the postdoc at Tokyo?
Yeah, this was 2 years. So, and I was staying very close to what I did before. This was in the Department of Precision Engineering. So, however, let's say what I experienced in the laboratory was quite different from what I expected from the newspaper. I was expecting high-tech, shiny, this and that. However, reality was kind of old, museum, backwards. I was thinking somebody's hiding the real stuff from me. So, but after some while, I figured out, no, that is the truth. But what happened over the course of the 2 years, I lost actually interest in research. Yeah, and I figured out I'm not a researcher. And that was to some extent, of course, a kind of wake up, because I spent so long time of my life in university, and if I had to submit my CV, I looked very much like a researcher.
You must be around about 30 about this time?
Exactly. And then having not worked seriously and then saying, no, this is not what I want. So it came then that I got you can say, famous telephone call, and I was invited to move to Brussels, to Belgium, to the European Commission. So, and there I acted as an advisor to the European Commission in matters of industrial cooperation towards Japan. So, and that at least brought me out of the research context, but it brought me into a kind of, let's say, bureaucratic or political circle. Yeah.
So how did you bridge out of that into industry?
Yes, so During that time at the European Commission, of course, let's say to have got the label as a bureaucrat is also not particularly helpful, I would say. However, there are some certain elements, for example, to know how all this funding structure works. That was a kind of asset that was appreciated. And then I found actually my first job in '96 in a German optoelectronics company. And that company also found my background in Japan interesting. So I moved over then to the Black Forest in Germany in '96 and started my first job.
Can you tell us the name of the company?
Oh yeah, this was the company Zeiss, so which is not so particularly good name for international business, but that's the name of the founder. Yeah.
And so are you managing teams in Zeiss at this time? Is it still functioning in Japan?
Oh, it's functioning and blossoming.
Blossoming. So were you tasked to grow the business in Japan, or?
At that time, actually, it was in a rather disastrous situation, and I was told, and this I will never forget, I was sent over with a clap on the shoulder and was said, the situation is so bad, even you can't make it worse.
Terrific confidence boost as you head for Japan.
But yeah, of course you can say, but the truth is also, until then I never had any leadership position. It was actually a perfect chance because also expectations were very low.
So you arrive as the new head of Zeiss in Japan, and you've got, how do you say, 10 so people? How many?
10, 12.
10, 12 people, right? Yeah. So you turn up, you're the new boss. So I imagine immediately you start to think, oh, this is a bit different, or this is a bit challenging. What were some of the early challenges you had as a leader?
I would say I had, let's say, of course I was aware the business is in a bad situation. It was loss-making. And with 10 people in a rather small office, I had no illusion that everybody has to work there. But then I was very surprised that I was treated like a in-between king and first-class tourists. So I was treated with utmost respect to the point that I was kept away from the business. And that in the beginning, of course, felt nice in a certain way to be treated like that. But at the same time also, I said, yeah, with 10 people, actually everybody has to work, even the CEO. Yeah.
So Zeiss had been in Japan for quite some time?
I would say at that day it was 10, 15 years.
10 or 15 years. So after 10 or 15 years, they're making no money in Japan. Yes. And was the previous president a Japanese president?
No.
No?
No. So
another headquarters expert.
Yes. Unfortunately, the company Zeiss has the world's strongest competitors, both Japanese companies. And that didn't make things easier. However, it was also always told by the local management, oh, Japan is a difficult market. You have to invest for a long time, this long time thing. And I would say German companies are a little bit, this is their soft spot. They like long-term stories. To some extent, even the worse the losses, the better the outcome. Yeah, and however, that story was surprisingly told for a pretty extended period of time.
So what were some early challenges for you as the leader after you realised, hang on a minute, I don't want to be the king and the A-class tourist. I actually want to do a job here as president.
Yes, so actually it took quite some time and effort to convince the people that I'm serious about that.
What did they thought you were a type of liaison person with headquarters and not going to run the business?
Yeah. For example, said let's visit some customers. Yeah, and also especially those little bit difficult ones or some customers who are not customers and all that. Yeah, and I went to, I remember 2 or 3 visits, and these were just perfect visits. The customer praised and so on. And I thought there's something wrong. Yeah, if this would be all our customers, the figures were not like they were. And it turned out that these customers, I wouldn't say they were bribed, but they were carefully selected.
Sakura.
Yeah.
In Japanese, we call that sakura.
Yeah, and probably there was behind my back a talk, be nice, do a show, and if he's gone, then we continue. Yeah, so this was part of the story to being kind of kept away of the business. Yeah, and I still remember I had quite some challenge to judge whether this was a kind of courtesy or a kind of conspiracy. I was doubting the intentions behind that. I was kind of never sure.
So you must start digging in to try and find out what's going on here.
Yeah.
And what other things came up after you started digging in and you tried to have some impact on the business? Are you getting resistance? Are you getting people changing their view? What happened there?
Oh, I would say of course, what you do is, for example, how the money is spent. I looked into that and I figured out that there were some expenses that just did not match the size and ambitions of the company. Yeah, so lots of memberships in expensive places. Yeah, and
these are what, golf club memberships or club memberships?
Yeah,
or?
Club memberships. Yeah, but that was the time of the club memberships. Yeah, and whether they were useful anyhow. Anyway, for that size of the company, there were quite too many. So and when I asked around a little bit, nobody felt bad about that. It was, everybody said, yes, this is how it is. This was the status quo.
We're losing money, but we're spending it on these memberships because that helps us to interact with clients or something.
To some extent, even that was a trained process because never have seen earning money. So it was it was kind of a ritual that also the continuous loss of money did not lead to changes.
And no pain point for the staff.
That's also. So that means this was probably very surprising, this huge gap between the terribly looking figures and the kind of peaceful atmosphere inside. So that sense of urgency was a word that probably was not in a dictionary there.
So how does the new boss create a sense of reality? We're making a loss here and we've got to do something about it now. How did you start to get them to understand that?
Yeah, I would say by making, a kind of speech in terms of, you have to understand the situation and this is how it is, which easily turns out to be a kind of speech like you do in a business school, did not work. Did not work. People just looked at me and so therefore this transfer that bad figures translate into individual action, that link was very weak. So at the end, I figured out it is more effective to work on individual habits, on procedures, on what to do, and to train routines. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So and there I figured out by giving routines and also that gives also structure to a day and becomes, if done, also then it becomes automatic.
So what sort of structures did you give them? I mean, they've got their jobs. They're doing something they're probably working ridiculously long hours as well as Japanese. I don't know. But.
Yeah. Well, for example, you're completely right. There was no lack of hours. Yeah. However, so for example, what is missing is the kind of reflection thing of, okay, let's sit down for 10 minutes and see what these many hours have brought us. So this process, I would say I started. And that was a painful process. Yeah? So because not all, some recognized that the output was not so much.
So this is probably the first time, maybe in a long time, they've been made accountable for their results. So did you get pushback on that? Did you get resistance on that? Or did people start to get the picture, oh, he's right?
I would say both, not. So resistance, not. But also this, now I understand and now I'm enlightened, also did not happen. So it was more, they followed, but in the moment I stopped, also they stopped. So it was, so this was the other thing that was quite of a surprise. So sometimes I felt, so I don't know whether the picture of a huge marble made from stone, you try to move it in the sand. And in the moment you stop moving, it stops. Yeah. So this idea, you just kick it and it rolls. No, this picture did not happen. Yeah.
So you start building up some work habits with them, and then what's the other challenges you found? You needed to bring new things in or change things. What were the other things, the pain points there?
I would say as a foreign company, especially as a technology company. The competence, the product, everything is in the headquarter, which is far away. And in Japan, a small office and also not the biggest market, not of highest attention, but extremely critical customers. So how to get the attention of the headquarter to support that market. And then on top, the prices are also not good. So that means from motivation, from headquarters point of view, to support a market that is not paying money, that requires lots of attention and is asking endless questions about details that were never asked before, that was a challenge. And to engage the headquarter in that way, that was a challenge.
Was this the Japanese staff asking very detailed questions, maybe on behalf of clients, that headquarters would not recognise that's a normal situation? Or was this, from when you joined, starting to dig in and start asking more questions?
Oh, I would say probably the asking was done before. However, each answer from headquarters usually create 2 additional questions. So that means many of the salespeople were engaged actually in translation works back and forth and absorbing, and many of them understood that this is their job, which is a complete misunderstanding. However, this is how it was. So that means compared to Japanese local competitors, to solve trivial questions took multiple effort in time and man hours.
And is this driven, in Japan, the buyer often very risk averse. So the way they cover that risk aversion is by getting as much data and information as they possibly can to then see where the problems might be and eliminate those problems. So is this drive on the questions coming from the clients who are demanding it, and the salespeople feel they have to go back to the client and provide these answers?
Usually it is coming from the clients, but some of the salespeople are already so afraid of questions that they, in order of preparation, already asking lots of questions beforehand.
Anticipating.
And some of them actually are more and let's call it worse than the questions of the customers. Just to be prepared in case. And what usually then happened is that even a person sitting on the other side of the ocean, even with a long temper, sooner or later says, "Oh, I cannot do that. I'm getting crazy." And somehow to establish a relationship and say, no, at the end, there is light at the end of the tunnel. That was a job of me.
So you started to work better with headquarters for them and clarify what we need. Now, what about on the client side of things? Because you had your little show on your first visit, your Sacre clients are there and, oh, you're all wonderful, we love the company. When did you start to get a chance to dig in with some clients who weren't the pre-selected ones and actually find out what's really going on? How long did that take you?
Oh, I would say it came together with a shift of strategy, because the company Zeiss is the European market leader. And so that means in Europe, the company behaves with lots of self-confidence, has got a huge product lineup and can promote all the products to all customers. In Japan, you cannot survive with these many products in terms of know-how, inventory, and whatever, and competition, of course. So therefore, we decided we cannot copy the European strategy because we are just an underdog here. So we pick out of this big catalog these few items that have got very strong differentiating items when there is not too much competition, and we push for those.
That's a very logical business approach. Why does it take until you turn up that they hadn't thought of that already under their previous leadership or by themselves?
Very difficult to say, because all people in the process, none of them is stupid. The only explanation I have, if you're sitting in the European headquarter and you're the market leader in Europe, you just say, where's the problem? And I think it's a lack of imagination and experience that in another market you are not competitive. So and to recognize that.
And did that strategy work where you sort of isolated down to some key products where you've got differentiable advantage, strong brands, strong technical support, and you can actually get behind the products? And how long did it take for that to start working?
I would say, frankly speaking, the first firm orders came after 3 years when I left.
3 years after, and then after you left.
Yes,
Wow.
yeah. So I would say the first year was more a little bit cleaning up and finding myself, and also to getting, I would say, the headquarter in line with that strategy, because this was actually a big pill to swallow, because everybody wanted to promote their products in Japan, since the market is big. And the size of the market is just creating so much desire. If we get only 1%, this famous 1%, yeah, which is so difficult to get, yeah, but then to say, forget that. Let's just focus on these few items. And the idea was, once we are established with the customer, then we can bring in the other products, which are kind of bread and butter type of product. That was the strategy. And now, since I'm still in contact with the company, it works. So, and the company has got 100 plus employees today. So you asked what that was. So highly differentiated product, and there the number of potential customers was not thousands, but only 10. So, and these 10 I visited. And then, of course, then you know what the real issues were. And these are OEM customers who buy the products on regular basis in serial production. So that means the specification process until they confirm that the product is ready took 2 years.
Wow. Well, this is them testing the products? Or?
Yeah, this was testing in their R&D department, whether the product behaves like it should. It was tested on and against everything unimaginable.
So this is a well-tried and true established product with market dominance in Europe, which at the Japanese buyer point of view, that meant nothing. And until they could satisfy themselves, they didn't believe any of your data, any of your materials, any of your history, and they had to take that period of time to satisfy themselves.
Exactly, and it went even to the point that one of the devices, which is measuring distances and gives out the distance in centimeters, they wanted to have the software code, how we are making the software inside. And that's the question. Beside that, nobody ever asks this and nobody cares. It's also pretty much intellectual property. But there came the pushback and say, hey, if we want to understand how the product works, we need the software. So it's really the inner working of the device. And that was a very strange thing. So to say, hey, guy, we are the experts for this. Your business is that business. Do your job. Please accept that I'm the expert for that. I didn't get that credit.
They didn't accept that?
No. And that was quite a big surprise. Yeah.
Now, this is very interesting because headquarters are very confident. They're thinking we've got a full range of products. Stefan should be pushing all of our products in Japan. He's coming back and saying we only want these limited products. And now he's coming back and saying that the client's not buying. They want to test everything. So that must have been very hard for you to get Germany to understand that this is how the Japanese customer's thinking and we need more time, when they've been thinking 15 years losses or the last few years losses, and it doesn't look like there's any light at the end of the tunnel, and now we've got to go right back to zero and test everything on the Japanese end. How did that conversation go?
I would say with mixed success. Finally, I found very few brothers in mind who supported me.
You found very few
brothers in mind.
Oh, brothers in mind, right?
Yeah, so they said, no, actually, I believe that. So, and I support that. Yeah? So, and they were in for the long term. And finally, these are, I don't know, by chance, coincidence, today, my best friends still. Because we went to quite some
struggle together.
Yes.
And so for your Japanese team, how are they reacting to this? Because here's a guy who's come in, he's come up with a quite different strategy, quite different to what headquarters was thinking in the past. He's decided on a very, focused, concentrated strategy. He's dealing with specific clients, only 10 of them, and he's going very deep with these clients, and he's pushing the clients to test and being prepared to give them even up to the code to satisfy the client. So did they see you as a hero? Did they see you as a crazy gaijin? How do they view your activities when all this is going on?
I would say they observed that I could move headquarter in a way they could not. And in the beginning, I hoped that this would serve as encouragement that they would do the same. But in reality, they laid kind of back and let me do it.
Yeah, your job. Right?
Yeah, actually. So at the end, I found myself in the role as the main interface man, including translating the stuff. That was actually, this is a pattern that I saw repeatedly later on as well. So that means this kind of ability to communicate, which is partially language, but it's only partial. The other part is basically to push into this persistence. Yeah, and that did not develop, or I could not develop locally so well. And it took probably quite some time until local competence has been built up.
Were the Japanese salespeople able to push the client, because you've got market share in Europe, you've got an established record, you're a market leader? Were they able to push the client on not having to do the full testing and get them to reduce it down to some element or something? How effective were they in convincing the client to take a different approach?
Oh, not at all.
Zero effective.
Zero.
And why is that? Why weren't they able to convince the client?
I would say to begin with, it was not a part of their own understanding what their job is. So later I felt very much they feel themselves as the ambassador of the customer.
So they're working for the customer.
Yes.
Paid by you.
Yes. So this is the only way actually it makes sense to me, basically to truly convey the intention of the customer to the bad supplier. Yeah,
so they're giving you 100 reasons why we need to do the testing, as opposed to giving the buyer 100 reasons why we don't need to do the testing.
So I remember still some discussions where some completely irrelevant tests were again questions, and then I asked the question, why is that? And this question was completely out of the blue. The salespeople said,
this is why to your people, or why to the client?
Why to my people.
Your people, okay, right.
They did not reflect on why. The customer said. That's it, yeah.
So after 3 years of this, you obviously decide there's some, maybe life's short and there's other things to do. So what makes you jump out after 3 years? You're getting somewhere.
I have to say I remember still two clients which were the biggest and also I would say the most difficult ones, who happened both to sit in Nagoya. So I remember I visit them both on a monthly basis. So that means I visit them 30 times. And these discussions were always extremely painful because I came, I would say at best, with 80% of the answers they expected at best, and I was sure I get another collection back. So, and it happened to me when I already arrived at their train station, I got a kind of stomach reaction because these meetings were just so unhappy. So, and then after 3, and in that process, several times I was close to giving up and said, this can never has a. Sometimes I doubted even whether they want to buy or whether they employ people just to play with me to make tests. So this, in my weak moments, I thought that.
Now, this is interesting. Do you think that was a Nagoya thing in particular, or do you think that was a Japan thing? Because Nagoya, I lived in Nagoya for 4 years, and I noticed that very conservative, and we talk about the closed country, or the Japan was closed to foreign contact for hundreds of years, 400 years during the Tokugawa period. And when I was living in Nagoya, I felt the people there hadn't really woken up to the fact that that closed country period had ended. But psychologically, they had a very closed mind about the world and about things, even to the point that people from Tokyo, from their point of view, were outsiders and not really welcome. People from Kansai, a little bit welcome. Foreigners, they're completely out. So do you think there was a mindset there that they were from Nagoya, or this is just a Japan thing compared to other buyers?
I would say I associate with Nagoya area, let's say the center of the automotive and the machine tool industry, which are happening there. And I would say, if I have to say something, there's the very strong conviction that they know better. Yeah, and that is, of course, already an introduction to whatever comes later. They know better. So, and that is how I read the situation. Mm-hmm. Sometimes they know, but very often also not. And this will create then the difficulties. So I just want to perhaps on a laughing note, after 3 years, that term was finished because time was finished. So, and then I was visiting for the last time my regular counterparts, which were always the same people I met. So
this is your sort of farewell visit?
Yes, it was the farewell visit, and it went up and down, and at that time it was still kind of not clear whether they would use the device. So, and sometimes my counterpart was okay, sometimes I just hated him, just for so, and then he was super emotional and said to me, this was the best cooperation he ever had in his life.
And what's going on in your mind at the moment he says, this is the best cooperation of my entire life? What are you thinking at that moment?
In the beginning, I thought this is a kind of hidden camera somewhere. I could not believe it. Yeah? And the second reaction was, hey, guy, you could have sent a message before, perhaps, somehow. Because I thought always I'm on your dumping list somewhere. Yeah? So that was a big surprise. Mm. And I learned later, because of that project also, and the qualification at the end was successful, possibly also successful without testing, but anyway, he got a huge promotion and he's now the head of the complete R&D department. Yeah, so there's some good story to that.
If you want to be successful as a leader, do the Leadership Training for Managers course. All companies need people who can both manage and lead. Leading people screams out for real skills in communication, dealing with all different types of people, being excellent at innovation, planning, delegation, handling mistakes, doing performance reviews really well, and inspiring and motivating the team. Do the Leadership Training for Managers course now in either Japanese or English. So what happens after ZIC?
So no, I went back. I went back to ZIC to headquarter.
Oh, so that was a 3-year posting. Yes. You're 3 years up. Yes. Come back.
So and I took over the business unit that deals with these specialty sensors, because very soon Japan became for ZIC the biggest market in the world in that small sector.
In those areas that you chose.
So and then all of a sudden. The table turned and everybody said, yeah, if people in Japan can do it, why can't you do it in Spain? Yeah, so this is how it is. Yeah. So I spent there a couple of years basically continuing my job, and I kept also the position as a supervisory board member of the Asian subsidiaries in order to... So, and actually we applied there at that time the strategy in general to move into this market with these special sensors, which seemed to be a good strategy.
And so how did you come back here? How did you get out of Germany and back to here?
There is a private angle. So I got married to a Japanese wife. And we always decided then to say once the children have to go to school, that is a decision point, and then we will sit together and see what we do. And then came that day. And then we decided that because the Japanese culture is so dense and special, if we sent them to school in Germany, that then the train would have left the station. So we decided, let's go back to Japan. So I left ZIC with, was a difficult decision, was not easy. So, and then I looked for a vehicle to come back to Japan. I liked that industry, so I stayed in the industry, and fortunately, I got the position of CEO of Bosch Rexroth in Japan.
Bosch Exports?
Rexroth.
Oh, Axel.
Rexroth. Very difficult to say.
Yeah.
Rexroth. Yeah. So, I was very surprised from the day, and I learned they have got 1,000 people in Japan.
Oh.
So and that was.
And you're the head of 1,000 people.
Yeah. Basically. So I was thinking, oh, that's a little bit too much. Yeah, basically from having 10 to 15 people here in Japan, then going back to headquarter, which is more a headquarter structure, then to 1,000. Yeah, but then this interview went super smoothly, and I got the job faster than I could. That should have made me a little bit suspicious, actually, because that company was also in a very, very bad shape, but much bigger.
So scale of the problem is much larger for it.
I do not know whether I somehow received a reputation of digging into these type of situations, but this was a very traditional Japanese company which was bought by Bosch Rexroth and did not behave and did not get integrated into the global structure, and one of the reasons was among these 1,000 people there were only 2 or 3 who spoke English, and in the beginning some expats from Germany were sent, and they just could not interact with anybody in their own organization. Then the company was in bad shape. Was an OEM supplier to the construction machine industry, and construction machine industry is I would say it's a pretty rough industry. So where the business practices are globally pretty. Today, people would use the word compliance also in that context. So it happened that headquarter looked at the figures and figured out, oh, there's too much of infrastructure. We need to close one plant. Yeah, that happened very soon after the company was purchased. So my predecessor was sent there to close the plant. And he was going there, and if you cannot speak the language, how do you close the plant? So he went to that plant. Oh, it happened to be a plant in Nagoya. He announced that the plant will be closed. Somebody translated something. Everybody nodded. And then he went again back to Tokyo. And then some time later, he was reported that the plant was closed. But wasn't. The other thing is some products were sold under cost. So very simple, go to your customer, ask for a 30% price increase just to cover the cost. He went with his sales manager. The sales manager duly translated, and the customer nodded. And this was celebrated as a big success because the customer obviously agreed to the price increase. But that was also not translated. So, and that means I think it was after 2 or 3 years having this ceremony.
So the old closed plant is still functioning. Everyone's getting paid, still producing content.
And the prices were still the bad prices. But it took 2 years until it was figured out that actually nothing has happened. And the translations were not translations. Yeah.
So do you have to close the plant, or do they decide by this time they'll keep the plant?
No, let's say, so at least that was the situation waiting for me. And at least I was given the credit then that I speak Japanese. So if you can speak Japanese, you can close a plant. So that was the simple logic. But later on, I also wondered a little bit, how can people in Germany judge whether I can speak Japanese or not? I claimed that I can. So actually, there was also lots of, I would say, trust in me on that side. It turned out this closing was, of course, a very complicated situation since the company had not only one union, but 2, and one of them the very, I would say, aggressive communist union. And with those union members, you should not unnecessarily make unfriendly situations. So it happened that during my stay, while I was still thinking what I could do, because there was pressure from headquarters, just do it. Where's the problem? Just do it. And sensing that this is difficult, let's call it, or impossible, what to do. And then there came the crisis 2008. Yeah, and all of a sudden, so in OEM business, the orders dropped by 80%. the plants, one in Tsuchiura and one in Nagoya, both were operating only 1 day per week. Yeah, and so at that time, I took the chance to say, okay, now it's about survival. Because everybody understands on 1 day per week you cannot survive. And at that day, it was also not clear when or whether the situation would recover. So it was completely not clear. And even biggest companies were counting their money, whether they could survive that crisis at that time. So, and I took that opportunity to say, yeah, before headquarter tells us, please do this and that. And the worst case is close both plants, close Japan. Let's be proactive, close one and move that plant into the other plant, merge them. And that decision was actually supported by the union. Yeah, so the situation was, I would say, dramatic enough to make that cut. And once the business recovered again, then of course the decisions were already made. Yeah, so that was just timing. I would say otherwise, probably I would.
So what are some other challenges on scale? Because 1,000 people, 10 to 15 to 1,000 people, massively different leadership requirement. What are some of the things you hit when you had this massive scale up, apart from closing plants and, that type of thing? As a leader, though, what were some of the things you bumped up against when you got to that sort of scale?
Obviously, there were more layers in hierarchy. Yeah? With the 10 people, you just turned around 180 degrees and you saw them all. With 1,000 people, they were not all at the same site. They were not on the same floor. And so that means you had to deal with hierarchy. And you had typically a handful or two handful of people whom you regularly communicated to. So the question is whether what you intend or what you say, how much of that reaches the ground.
And how do you check up on that? I mean, this is a point, isn't it? Middle management supposedly is amplifying what you're saying down to the people at the very bottom. So the whole organisation has got an alignment around what we believe and the why and what we're doing, and you charge forth as the leader. But how do you actually check that they're not misunderstanding or not getting the information?
Oh yeah, that process went pretty quick. I pretty realized that nothing would go down. So that means I did not need too much time to figure that out. So therefore the question was more, how can I make sure that that at least something goes. So what happened is that in meetings, and also in Japan there's no deficit in meetings, that I invited the people on the ground floor when it came to subject topics. So I did not rely on management reports, and this was not so.
Did you get pushback on that? Because there is a hierarchy here, and people who are used to being the ones who get the direct information from the boss, that's a type of asset, currency for them, which they control, gives them power over the people at the bottom. But you come in and you're starting to bring people from the bottom into these meetings. Do they get some pushback on that their authority was diminished or their status was diminished, or they didn't have a problem with it?
A pushback, let's say, if you use that word, it sounds like an action. I would say I assume people were not happy and tried to softly convince me that this is not a good idea. Yeah, and the number of reasons why that is not a good idea, the list was long. Yeah, and it started with the person does not know, but I said, yeah, he's the person who should know. Yeah, okay. Or the next one was, he's perhaps too nervous, or he doesn't speak English. And I said, okay, let's speak Japanese. So I tried then to diffuse all the arguments, and at the end, of course, if there are no arguments on the table, they could not do anything. So, and I would say I introduced a kind of, I wouldn't call it a randomness in that meetings by also not sticking to the strict topic, but also asking some other questions and that means nobody could be safe that he could control the meeting or could plan the meeting. Yeah, and over some time, I guess, I earned reputation is the wrong word, or at least people got used to me and my style, and they could at least predict, and they at least could predict, oh, he's doing these things. And finally, I guess people figured out the best preparation for a meeting is if they tell their people beforehand. Yeah. It is a little bit hitting the bush type of thing. It is not that I really wanted to know. It is more to let everybody else know that I have got the means to figure out.
Yeah, because often I think in Japan the boss gets told what people want the boss to know as opposed to what the boss perhaps themselves would like to know or wish to know.
Yeah, of course, still I don't know these things I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. Still a mystery, right? So what other challenges came up when you sort of dug in a bit further with, time moves on and you're starting to get a sense of the company and a sense of your direct reports and a sense of how to get better communication? What other things came up? It was challenging.
Yeah, I would say in general everything that is related to change. Yeah, that's Of course, to some extent it is human, to some extent it's cultural, but I would say the corners were quite heavy leaned against any type of change. And when I talk about change, I'm not talking about super drastical change. There is no change small enough that it isn't difficult. Yeah. So even moving the desks 1 meter further, it can become everything difficult. Yeah.
And how is that communicated to you? Is that you suddenly have people in your office telling you this desk moving idea is a completely crazy idea, or people just not moving the desk?
Yeah. So to some extent, it is a little bit similar to what I said before. Let's say to make the appeal, to explain why the changes are necessary, and then hope that the transfer happens in the mind, and then people say, "Oh, now I understand, and now I moved it." Did not happen. So at the end, I even sometimes skip the explanation why, because the why did not solve or did not help. So therefore, I just engaged in moving the desks. So let's move the desks, type of thing. Yeah. So
you pick up that end.
Yeah. Exactly, and that actually did not even then kind of trigger this change button. If I would have said the word, let's change the desk, then there would possibly a kind of reaction, but just doing it, I felt very often, especially of course when it comes to small things, just doing it is the better way.
And, getting engagement in or big organizations anywhere is always difficult. And with a lot of Geishke, big international companies, multinationals, they do engagement surveys or, employee satisfaction surveys and these types of things. And usually you get dragged into a meeting with all your colleagues from different countries and they put up the charts and they show, Brazil's off the chart, everyone's happy down there, and India, they're off the chart, and APAC somehow is not, looking so good, and Japan's sort of the bottom of APAC, and suddenly you get a lot of pressure from headquarters about, hey, your people aren't engaged, look at these numbers, you've got to fix that. Did you have that type of process inside Bosch at that time?
Yes. Bosch was very keen to that, and exactly this chart I have also seen. And there were also strict follow-up on that, and it was seen as a huge deficit, and there must be something wrong. And we must help you. However, it turned out that then also there were some discussions about the validity of the questions. And I remember one of the questions that came from the original English one, would you go an additional mile for the company? This was the kind of question in the original English version, which was seen as an indicator of how much motivation there is. And it was translated into, would you go beyond what the company wants? Or something like that. And then everybody said no. Because if the company wants more, they should say that they want more, and then we will do it. Yeah. So, and people were very irritated in Japan why people would go beyond that, because that was not felt to be correct. Yeah, and there were one, two questions of that nature where at the end I would say the method of the questioning was asked, what pushed into question. So and finally I think people calmed a little bit more down on that and agreed that it's probably more helpful not to compare Japan with Brazil, but this year's Japan with last year's Japan.
Or on a similar in company or industry, Japan comparison, how you stack up against your competitors' engagement scores would be a more logical, if you can get those numbers. Some of those companies provide those sort of, domestic comparisons to get some sense, and actually the scores are all equally low, so there's nothing particularly about, Bosch and what they're doing.
Yeah, but I do not want to leave the impression that everything is only about a kind of bad translation. Probably the figures are low, and I also have no answer.
Did you try to do things? I mean, you've got headquarters pushing you on these numbers. In my experience, they, like you said, they have somebody in HR who's looking at this stuff, and they're saying to them, you go and help, Japan to get these numbers up, and they become very intrusive, and they start really pushing you on what are you doing and following up on what actions you've done to get more engagement and da-da-da-da-da. Did you get that type of pressure and therefore have to then react to that and do things here?
No, I would say not to that extent. There is no controlling machinery that is doing that. Of course, let's say the topic of engagement is seen as one of the indicators. So I'm still, let's say, I have got that topic also on my plate. I'm still wondering a little bit because on the one hand side, it is not a unique topic to one company. It's something like to all companies. So that means, it is something about the relationship between people and their work in general. There may be an element. If all companies would be good and me would be bad, I would say, oh, that must be related here. But I wonder whether there is something around that. The other thing is also this topic of engagement. It's not only engagement into work, but whether the level of engagement into anything, engagement into volunteering, engaging into going out, engaging into whatever, seems to be low in Japan.
So how many years were you at Bosch?
With Bosch, I was for 6 years.
6 years. And then you joined Zeiss from
No, then I went back to Germany.
Oh, back to Germany again. Right.
Yes.
So at the end of the 6 years, when you look back at those 6 years, what were some of the things you felt that actually were a success for you in terms of the leadership area with people?
Oh, I would say for me to deal with 1,000 people, which was pretty intimidating when I started. At the end, I could deal with that situation. And
how did you get to that point of being able to deal with it? What were things that happened or you did to make you able to do that?
Oh, probably only in my mind. So I felt sometimes I'm not ready, but then you're never ready. Yeah? So, but I was sometimes I was doubting, why could anybody give me that job? Didn't they see that this is over my my capability? Yeah. So what
you're saying is ultimately after 6 years of doing it, you're doing it.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Yeah. So and it's a little bit like becoming parent. Whether you're ready to be parent, you're never ready.
Yeah. So back to Germany, and then how many years there?
There I was also 6 years.
6 years. Oh, okay. Yeah. And
then 3 years ago I came back to Zeiss now. So I'm with Zeiss now for 3 years.
Oh, okay. So what made you choose to change from Bosch to Zeiss? Because Bosch is a huge juggernaut of a company too.
Oh, yeah. So I still remember that was still in the... the 2008-2009 recession was still not over. So, and I remember I had an expat contract from Germany, which had a deadline. And at that time... So the labor market within Bosch was very tight. So that means I had the right to get back to Germany, but nobody was actually waiting for me there. And I got kind of offers that were kind of offers with a message, better don't come. Yeah, so this is at least how I sensed the situation. Yeah.
Although you spent another 6 years, though, you mentioned after you got back from Japan, right? in Bosch?
No, a different company.
Oh, so
I moved from Japan, Bosch, to a different company in Germany.
Oh, you left. Okay, you left Bosch, and so you're working in Germany for a different company. Sorry, I misunderstood. So who did you go to after Bosch?
Oh, this is the company Igel Burgmann, which belongs to Freudenberg, which is a company with a very intimate business relationship with a big Japanese company, and at the end to navigate within a German-Japanese environment that made me a good candidate for that job.
And that was working there or back here?
In Germany.
In Germany for that whole time?
Yes.
And then you decided to come back to Japan, and Zeiss is the way back into Japan, is that
Exactly.
And how big is Zeiss here in Japan?
Zeiss has about 350 associates here in Japan.
So for you, it's a walk in the park after running 1,000 people here.
Yes. Over the 1,000 people, I have to say 850 of these 1,000 were factory workers. With a rather small sales organization. Mm-hmm. So here it's different. So here we basically have no production. So that means, or very little production. That means almost all employees are sales and service.
Sales and service people, right? Mm-hmm. And so, again, you've had a really good background in industry and in Japan, and you come to Zeiss, you're the new president here. What were the challenges in this new company that you struck?
I would say Zeiss is a very special company in a sense. It's got an incredibly good reputation for integrity, long-term thinking, and super advanced technology and products. And part of the appreciation in Zeiss depends on the knowledge of your products. So it means even if you're a manager, you're supposed to know quite a bit about products. And that was a kind of, let's say, a little bit like going back to school again. So and there I was in the beginning thinking, to become an accepted partner in discussions, I have to do a lot of learning here. So that was a little bit one of the topics. The other things, on the surface, everything looked super nice in Zeiss. So frankly speaking, I thought, this is the perfect job in life.
I can retire here.
Yeah. So I thought so. Of course, not everything is like that. So one big difference is Zeiss in Japan is a very healthy company, unlike the previous one. So I did not have to come here to close something or something. However, I am confronted with the difficulties that come with long-term success. Because this long-term success is additional and possibly even the biggest reason for not changing. So that means besides, I would say, a general reluctance to a change, then on top operating in the medical industry and machinery industry, which are rather conservative industries, then on top being blessed with continuous success. So that means in the moment you challenge the status quo, you get immediately either explicitly or what do you want? And so that is actually...
Are you doing business with Japan? Do you really know how things work? Japan Business Mastery provides the answers. Do you have the right networks and know how to create them? Do you know how to get on the same wavelength with Japanese buyers? Do you know what being trustworthy looks like from the Japanese perspective? Japan Business Mastery is based on more than 30 years' experience in Japan and will become your go-to guide. Want to succeed in Japan? Buy Japan Business Mastery now. So, in terms of engagement, you had a sort of engagement experience and scores at Bosch, and then how about here? Are they all super happy, wonderfully engaged? Is there a big difference between the companies in that sense? They do the same sort of surveys, I suppose?
I would say, there are some differences, possibly in the companies which were under economic pressure. people at the end knew something happens, need to happen. They didn't like, but something has to happen. In a company that is doing good, then everybody can continue. Yeah? So therefore, to instill this sense of we have to do something, that is very difficult. Yeah? The other thing is...
What do they say? The enemy of great is the good. So when things are going well, when things are good, no one has any imperative need to make it great. Yeah, it's hard to get people to go from good to great.
That is surely one of the topics. The other thing is, of course, also Zeiss as a technology company likes to hire very technical people, and I would say in general preferring technical skills over management skills. So that means think of the company of a association of highly skilled individuals who are all together not good in team play, and leaders not wanting to be leaders.
Oh, okay. What are you doing about that then?
So everybody is highly engaged towards his personal work. Yeah, but not engaged towards the abstract goals of the company. Yeah, so therefore we have got super high scores. Are you proud to work at Zeiss? Highest values ever seen in the survey. This is at least what the survey company says. And why is that so? There, the questionnaire says it is these are the products and the meaningfulness of the work, which is, however, very much decided by the individual itself. Yeah, so you can say that is kind of utmost delegation, but that would misuse the word. I would say it is rather unmanaged.
Interesting. So what do you do about that? I mean, everything's working well, nothing's broken. They're working individually, extremely diligently. They've got a lot of accountability for whatever they're doing. They don't have any great sense of need for teamwork or change. Is there a downside of that where people are not cooperating with each other, which affects the business, or they're working in silos, so needed information is not flowing nicely, or people are not good to work across functions, or what's been the downside of that?
Yeah, so I figured out just to make the kind of general threat, the bad competitor comes tomorrow, and if we continue like that, it does not work, because this story was told every second year, and the competitor never came because they are the same like we. So therefore, this argument just to invent an external threat, which could work, yeah, because this guy Atsu sometimes moves something what does not move from internal.
External pressure. Yeah.
External pressure, yeah. So, but this is frankly not credible. It's not tangible, and therefore people don't operate.
But my point is, though, if the company's doing well and they don't feel the need to change, is that lack of management actually negatively impacting the business? Is that lack of cooperation negatively impacting the business or not?
Yes, let's say overall, of course you can say, oh, this is not happening. But as you rightly say, as an outsider, say, hey, if this is all so bad, how can it be that the company is doing so fine? Yeah, there must be something good. So be careful not to rock the boat. So there are some shortcomings. Yeah, and for example, communication is one of them, because everybody is an expert, and probably more an expert than a person who likes to speak with another person. And here, this is rather training or not being used than bad thinking. Yeah. So when you talk about dysfunctionalities, is for example between sales and service. You're going to the same customer on the same account. The one guy doesn't feel it's important to tell the other guy that something happened there. Yeah, these type of things are hurting business. You can argue big or small. Yeah, but at least they are hurting business. But they are also realized by the people this is not good.
And particularly from the client side too, because, if two people from the same company turn up and it's obvious they are not discussing or not sharing information, the client feels, something wrong here. What's wrong with this company? It gives them some doubt about your reliability and your credibility, doesn't it? So those things from a client interface point of view are actually poison. You don't want that.
Yeah.
What do you do about fixing that, by the way?
Oh yeah, let's say here, I would say even that sounds harsh, but the client's, let's say, dissatisfaction probably was not the trigger. So at the end, if the client's dissatisfied, we may lose him as a customer. But in the pool of good figures, that would not create too much. So no, was more that people felt, I would have personally felt better if I would have known from that guy. So it was more a kind of personal pain that is creating then the kind of sense of necessity to say, actually we have got a kind of communication problem.
And did you do something to fix that communication problem? What did you do?
Yeah, no, so firstly, I kind of recognized that before, but when addressing it before it was recognized by the team itself, it was denied. Now, everybody agreed that there is no problem. So therefore, actually, I figured out there must be the understanding that there is a problem. If the understanding of the problem is not there, it's very difficult. You must find a crack in the wall, and then you can open that. Yeah, and here, so what we have got started is, and this has got actually a bigger impact. We changed how we manage our accounts, and we look now as an account as not as a party with a sales target from 3 different teams, but we say that account has got only so much money to spend. What is the amount for Zeiss in total? And for the bigger accounts, we put the people into small teams and say, hey, you have as a team has got the target.
So it's a team target as opposed to an individual sales target. So that forces the cooperation.
Forces them, and also at the end makes it more enjoyable. Yeah. So for example, we have got 2 product lines which are organizationally handled separately, but they are aiming at the same customer. But the customer has got only once a budget, so that means the other person is a kind of competitor. But from management point of view, we send 2 people, but at the end he buys only 1 device. And me, I would say, I don't mind which one, but we are sending too many people there. Yeah, and to get out of that. So at the end, what is happening now, since we do this, fortunately, we are more successful. Yeah, and I guess this is something that is perhaps globally valid. Success helps. Yeah, and people are developing a certain hunger and already start. Yeah, we should do that with all accounts, not only with some selected accounts. Yeah, so.
What about innovation? And it could be a Bosch examples, or it could be the Zeiss examples. But if people are not engaged, don't care about innovation. Whether they care if it gets better, they don't care. Period. But if there's a certain level of engagement there, and it's a market with competitors, and you try and win in the market against competitors, innovation is one of the things that helps you to do that. How do you go about getting people to be thinking in innovative terms? I don't mean technical innovation, because that's coming out of Germany anyway, but I mean in the marketplace and that sales and service area, to be more innovative and get them to think differently about what they're doing. How has that been going?
Yeah, so this is, let's say, especially since Zeiss defines itself as a very innovative company where the product is only part of the story, that is a big issue. So we just moved over in this new building here half a year ago. And part of that logic to move here is also to refresh the complete organization and literally to leave also old practices behind. So therefore this relocation, some term it as a moving project. For me, it's only a change project. Yeah. So, and if we just do the same stuff here again like before, then we could have done it in the old place as well. In the beginning, I addressed that topic from day one, but the associates only thought about moving, and the desk is nicer and the address is better, but basically to continue life as usual. And only now they realize that's not the case.
So how do you implement or how do you insert change? I mean, physically moving from one office location to another means putting your stuff in a box. The box turns up, you unpack your stuff in your new desk, put your pens here, put your files there, and you go back to work. So how did you use that physical movement from one location to another to instill change in people?
Yeah, so I read a lot about how the mind works towards change. So, and I figured out there that in terms of resistance, actually it does not matter whether a change is small or big. They are all of the same magnitude. And part to get the mind going is to get out of balance. Yeah, and so therefore, to start a series of micro changes, which is endlessly long, is a very long and very painful journey. So I decided to go more for a kind of Big Bang type of thing, because once the big change happens, all the smaller ones are just not realized. So while moving here, we changed a couple of things. So, for example, here we introduced, without training, without too much, to free desk policy and clean desk. We abolished fixed telephone lines, only mobile lines. So that means people are not blocked to any desk anymore. So we further said we would like to go digital as far as possible. We are still not there. However, all attempts to do that in the old atmosphere were just hopeless. And we do this now. We reduced the number of copy machines, and put the printers in the far away corners just to influence behavior. So, and now it happens. You still can print, but you have to get your print by walking 50 meters, and then all of a sudden you don't need it.
They just use it as an electronic file and don't worry about the paper copy.
Yeah. So therefore, I would say this created a lot of, anxiety. But now, in the draft of these happenings, many smaller things are just introduced now.
Funny thing, you talk about paper. I was just reflecting on that. I recently, it happens from time to time, I send a company an invoice. It's a PDF file of the invoice. It's got our HUNCOR on that physical piece of paper. If you want a physical copy, you would print that out on a printer. They come back and say, oh, we need the hard copy. Yeah. So I take the same exact PDF file copy, print it out, and mail it to them. It's identical. So have you have those sorts of issues that people are still back and everything's paper-based, and to get the mindset to change that?
Yes. So, and of course, it is. Yeah. So still.
So if I send you an invoice, your finance people or accounting people are going to ring me up and say, no, we don't want that electronic copy. We need a hard copy. Send it over.
I would say here I have to praise my accounting people. They are probably the most innovative in that sense. However, at the interface to either suppliers or customers, the interfaces are given. So, and to enter a discussion with your business partner, let's make it the process leaner. That seems to be out of question. So it is accepted that if the customer says this, then you are not even don't touch that. Yeah.
If they want it by fax, they get a fax type of thing.
Yeah. So type exactly like that. And however, I said if we don't even ask, how can we ever? Yeah. So at the end, even the customer may think we want the fax. Yeah, because at the end, nobody remembers who actually wanted that. Mm-hmm. So we have got a very big service team here in Japan, which is servicing the devices in the field. So, and what is happening is on a service visit, the customer has to sign that the serviceman was there and spent the amount of time there. At the end, based on that, the invoice will be calculated. So, and that used to be a paper process. Now we have got a CRM system, we have got digital service reports, we have got iPads and all that. And the idea is now that this signature is collected digitally, and then everything is online already produced. And while you sign a second later, the invoice. So we have got that.
Fantastic.
However, in discussion, while introducing, there came the strong pushback from the customer, but he wants later a paper copy. A paper copy that he signed, that the serviceman was there. Endless discussion whether this was needed or not needed. So, usually what is said then, customers want boils down to one customer wants. Yeah, that is very often the translation. Finally, there was one of the famous compromises. The system was reprogrammed that if the customer wants some paper, we can forward this in print to the customer's fax machine, and we use the customer's fax machine as a printer.
So archaic.
And it costed money. And so I thought, okay, if it's what it is, then it's what it is. Now it turns out the system works only well if you are in a wireless environment. And now comes the stuff that, although this fax idea seems to be accepted, but now it happened that the network was bad and that could not be sent to the fax. And then there was no written trace left. And now the discussion is whether we should buy mobile printers. Yeah, I still hope that I can stop that discussion, but this goes along the line what you mentioned. Yeah.
Yes, some priceless resistance going on there to change. And if you think about Japan as a country where trust, like every country, is important, but I think particularly in this country, trust is a big thing. With your teams, you've had 3 different teams here in Japan with Zeiss, Bosch, and now with Zeiss. How do you go about building trust with your people?
Yeah, you start the sentence by taking it for granted that trust is necessary. Some people say, I don't care about trust, I'm the boss and I will operate on that basis. But here I would say, I also say, trust helps a lot, and without trust you will not succeed too much.
Well, you should introduce me to those people who are running around saying we don't need trust in Japan, because as a training company, I see a massive opportunity for me with those people, because they are bound to be having a nightmare problem. But let's talk about how you go and get trust.
So this is, let's say, I don't know, by design or education, I put a high value on trust before coming already to Japan. I would say there are two elements that were helpful. So one is to be predictable. So of course there are different people, different tempers, different characters, and I do not say you have to be like this or that, but consistency in behavior helps. So and there I try to, which is not too difficult. So I'm not an actor, so because I'm rather consistent in my behavior, so I'm not acting completely different when the same situation comes. So, and usually people are observing the boss, what he's doing in what situation. So there's a mutual learning process, and I try to support that process by being predictable. Yeah, and that serves me well. And on top of that, I try, especially when it comes to decisions, unasked, to share why I decide this way or not the other way. That also to make my thinking process predictable. Yeah, and then there is the chance, and it happens that already a lot of people can predict how I would judge a certain situation. And that creates some practical benefits to shorten some discussions, but it also creates some proximity. Yeah. So this is one thing. And the other thing is, I don't know whether this is the word authentic that is generally used, but I try to share some personal aspects. And that came probably from the first experience where this distance to the president was kind of the president of the company treated like not like a human, like a different animal. So, and just by giving some hints that I'm just the same person who is struggling to squeeze into the train and just to connect to common daily things. I think that is also that people say, oh, he's not just the president, he's also a person. These two things, I guess, they help.
If we had to give someone who's, we'll talk about giving some advice in a minute to people who are coming here, but just before we get on to giving a couple of pieces of advice to someone new to Japan, we've had a broad-ranging discussion. Are there any things that I should have asked you about leadership, or any points about leadership which we haven't covered, which you think are relevant?
I think we covered quite some ground.
Yeah.
Perhaps one question that is always on my mind is how much to adjust yourself in your behavior and your style to the local environment, which is quite different. Yeah? And there are two extreme possibilities. The one is you try to emulate and to become, at the end, more Japanese than the Japanese. Or you say, I don't care, I'm who I am, and I do my thing. Yeah? And these are obviously the extremes. But whether there is a kind of perfect place or not, that is a question I ask myself, and I wonder whether also other people.
So on that scale for you between I've gone Japanese completely and now I'm doing my own thing, where are you on that scale? Which one are you closer to?
I would say as a newcomer, I was probably at risk to be on I try to emulate Japan as much as possible. Until then you realize whatever you do not succeed. Yeah? But even it's not only that you don't succeed, you give away your strongest asset. That the asset is being different. So therefore, I would say over time, I was probably mentally trying to be 90% Japanese when I came here, and probably now I'm back to, I am balanced, I would say. I'm back to the middle.
You probably got, because you can understand Japanese, and you understand the culture, and your wife's Japanese, your kids have gone to school here, whatever. You've probably got quite a good holistic feel for what's going on, but you also understand that you're never going to be Japanese. Yeah. You can live here for your entire rest of your life. You will never be considered Japanese, ever. So you know that you can't get accepted, so there's no point trying. So I guess you start to find out where you can fit in and get the best of both worlds, I guess. Yeah. Well, let's think about a couple of pieces of advice for someone who's probably going to be sent out here for a 3 to 5 year posting. That seems to be the sort of cadence these days for expats. And we were going to give them, or you're going to give them, a couple of pieces of advice. What would you give them as advice? Maybe 3 pieces.
No. So I thought about advice, and some people asked me, I would say one thing is don't come here with firm beliefs, be open, be ready to learn something, yeah. And I guess the only thing is then not to project your experience or what you have learned before here to Japan. Just to be open that things are different, yeah. And I would say one challenge is, of course, not to see the differences as quality difference. Yeah, if you start judging, then I guess you enter the road of trouble. Yeah, I would say you could probably enjoy and benefit most if you absorb and to just wonder about things. Yeah, show yourself surprised, but be careful to judge. Yeah, because overall, the Japanese society is a well-functioning society, and if all the things that you find strange, terrible, or whatsoever would be so terrible, then the society would not work as it works.
All right. Well, this has been a really great talk, and even though we often spend time with each other in our study groups, I've learned so much about your background today and what you've been doing. It's been fascinating for me, so I really admire what you've done. And this has been another great interview in our series, Japan's Top Business Interviews. So please join us again for our next episode.